Tony Hyde, Columbia County. I think I'm going to make more of a comment than a question. And it's in agreement with what was just said. I think that the biggest issue for us as a state is framing the issue. If you really look at across the state, the landscape of industrial sites or potential industrial sites, we've just talked about all of the levee districts in this state. The prime industrial sites are the same. And it's a very big issue. You go back to that slide where you have I think it's Sacramento, the photograph of the town. I call it town loosely. And I was looking at that, and there's not the one that was flooded, the one with all the population, nice channel going through it, right there. If you go to the Scappoose, for example, we have a levee that looks a lot like that, only instead of houses, you have trees or other issues, but not houses. What you have in Scappoose, Rainier, Classic and I, in our county is the same as you have, for example, in Umatilla County and others, and that's potential. Lots of potential for job creation. But we haven't clearly framed how expensive this is going to be as a state, and therefore we don't have the attention of the legislature to get behind this issue. And this is a very big issue for the state of Oregon. And I think it's something that we need to frame, and we haven't. I really think that's the biggest piece. In terms of cost, I know from living in the city of Vernonia, being the mayor when it was flooded the first time and county commissioner when it's flooded the second time, that cost is a big issue. We have spent, since the last event in '07, roughly $80 million to elevate and move things out of the way because we now know we have a pattern. $80 million for a town of 2,400. Think about that for a minute. So it's not impossible when you hear these huge numbers, but unless we frame it, we can't even begin to address the issue.
Anybody want to follow up on that comment?
Yeah, I'd like to say something.
Christine?
I'm Christine Shirley with DLCD. So I think that's a really important point to get together and frame the issue. I also think it's important to develop a strategic plan in the sense of we are going to have a disaster at some point, and if you're ready with projects and a vision, FEMA money can be deployed effectively. But if we're not ready and we're just doing piecemeal stuff as we happen to find it, we're not going to be as effective as for a big program. So the Office of Emergency Management is embarking on a project called Oregon Recovers, and DLCD is playing a large role in that. And I would like to start a conversation about where we are now, where we'd like to go in the future, what can be done with the resources we have today, and then what we would do if we got that disaster money again. I think part of the reason that Vernonia was so successful is because they had that vision and they just went for it full on. And there weren't other competing communities that had that experience and vision. So if other folks want to take advantage of that money, you need to be ready. That's really the point. So, yeah, let's start talking about that.
Lynn, I would ask if you have anything in terms of the legislation that's being developed. Do you have any needs in terms of either information or things that you need to hear or want to hear from people, not necessarily today, but over the next month or two?
Can I say no?
You could.
No. Well, it's been helpful for me to be here
today and hear the specific cases of communities or those special districts, which helps me frame, you know, when I have to speak before our legislative committee and defend my request for funding, why it's important and why our modest $25 million request is frankly a drop in the bucket to help out probably the worst situations around the state, and you know, the plus up factors that Scott recited from California, helping out the most distressed communities, the ones that have the housing problems, the ones that have an economic development potential. I don't want to put a sour note on today, but you know, our $25 million request has to be viewed in light of what money is actually available. My request is part of an $895 million lottery bonding request that's been advanced by all the state agencies. There's only between 190 and probably $220 million of lottery bonding available. So we hope that the result of the requests we've all submitted is not an equal paring back of everybody, but still some winners and then some catastrophic losers, unfortunately. But that's the grim situation we're facing. I'm amazed at California's commitment and the scale of funding they provide. Hopefully all the people in this room can speak to the legislature. Each one of you has a legislator in your area and emphasize to them the need and how important it is, and also emphasize you're willing to do your own part. I'm equally intrigued by California's match system that provides a substantial amount of grant money. I was listening closely to hear where that bond issue was going to be a grant to the locals or simply loan money that's available, but it sounds like it's a grant based upon local match, and that's how important it is to California, and I think that's the point we need to make for all of our communities with our legislators, is it's that important, and that's the kind of commitment the state's going to have to make in order for the state to be successful and responsive and resilient.
Any comment from anybody? So, Kevin.
Thank you, Steve. Sorry, I know you're ready to wrap up very quickly. I appreciate what Scott has said, and 99% of the things that he has said, I'd say, hey, thanks, Scott. I agree with, and I appreciate the way that he is presented. But there is something he just said a minute ago that I just can't let go, and because it's a slight different. And I understand the context. The comment that Scott made was that the Corps doesn't care about the flood piece, but instead tied it to economic development. And in actuality, one of our primary missions is flood risk management, and a lot of out of various laws that the flood control acts and/or a lot of our projects, the primary purpose is flood risk management. So it was just that one statement. I know the context which you meant it in, but I also wanted the group here to know that for us, doing what our fair part from the federal perspective of providing flood risk management is an extremely important mission to us, and that's why working closely with you is so important to us. So thank you, Scott, for all you're saying, but I'm sorry, I just couldn't let the one statement go, so thank you.
I appreciate the comment, because you're right. What I should have said most clearly is national economic development is the measure that the Corps uses to determine which project is implemented in flood risk reduction. You're right.
So, when you're out having a good time and at your favorite bar or nightclub, somebody comes up and says, okay, it's the last dance. So I want you to just think for a moment about the fact that tomorrow you're going to be talking about this event to somebody else. And so I just want you to think about what you might say to that person. And if you would say the following statement, it was really great, and I learned a lot. I just wish that somebody had asked that guy blank. So just think about what that blank might be for you. And does anybody have a filled-in blank that they want to ask as the last question? Okay.
The state participates with the Corps in a initiative called Silver Jackets, and it's a federal, state partnership, and locals where it's appropriate, where flood risk management issues are discussed and projects are put forth, some of which are funded by the Corps. I went to the Silver Jackets National Meeting in September, and one of the key takeaway bits of heartburn that came out of that meeting from all state and local and federal partners was, why are we maintaining levees when we're just encouraging development behind them? And so I think that we need to be cognizant of that. We need to protect what's there, but also not build up these levees also and then encourage more risk behind them. So anyway, these professionals just found it very frustrating that they'd spend their time shoring up these levees only to have big subdivisions built behind them. So I just want to put that out there, something that we should think about and balance in our planning and strategic thinking.
So that conversation is a conversation going on in many places in the country. And in fact, there is an executive order called Executive Order 11988, 11988, which was actually promulgated by President Carter. And it limits federal investment and decisions in floodplains. And it's one of the tools being used more recently by federal agencies and the Corps to ask that question and say, is it smart for us to be protecting areas which are going to result in inducement of development? I can tell you that one community in Sacramento has taken what I think is a really healthy approach to this, which is they are taxing their citizens, not a sales tax, a property tax, for money that will be used for taking the project beyond its anticipated goal to the next level. So the project is a 200-year project and it's just about finished, but they're already taxing additional development and making those people pay money so that when you get an additional however many people, they'll go to 300-year protection, then they'll go to 400-year protection, then they'll go to 500-year protection. And the goal is to keep the total risk the same. So as the damageable property goes up, the risk goes up. But if the damageable property goes up and the level of protection goes up, then the risk stays the same. And so there are many communities that are tackling just that issue and saying, got to figure out where you're going to put development. It doesn't work to say we're not going to put it anywhere because our country is growing. Particularly in California, we have a lot of people who keep moving in despite all the regulatory burdens you hear about. And there's some really interesting policy decisions, because if you really care about greenhouse gases, you want to put people in denser environments where communities already exist. You don't want to put them 25 miles up the hill where now you have a risk of wildfire and additional greenhouse gases. But if you're going to put them where the existing communities are and increase damageable property, how are you going to make sure the risk doesn't go up and maybe goes down? And so these fees are one way of approaching that.
All right, with that, please join me again in thanking Scott for being here today. Scott, thank you very much. Really helpful. Thank you all for being here. I suspect that a number of people will be sticking around a little bit, so if you have questions of maybe Sarah Morrissey from Multnomah County Drainage District about what's going on there, or maybe, I don't know whether the Corps guys are going to be around for just a few moments. But anyway, thank you all, and have a good afternoon.